Welcome to the fourth lecture of the semester, and the first for Unit 2. In this video, I will briefly describe the assignment for this unit, discuss the differences between instructions and procedures, and then focus on particular features of effective textual instructions. For the first part of Unit 2, you will be developing a set of instructions or procedures for a particular scenario, audience, and purpose. There are three decisions that you have to make. So I'm going to open up the assignment sheet really quick. The first decision is to choose a scenario. This is a setting, an audience, and a purpose for your document. The scenario provides a realistic rhetorical situation for your writing, including a real setting in which your document would actually be written, an audience that would need or want to use your document, and a specific purpose for which they would use it. It works best to imagine a situation related to a job or position you've held, so that you are basing your decision off of an actual situation. If you look at the examples that I added into Unit 2, you can see at the top they include a brief paragraph identifying the scenario. Yours might be a little bit more detailed than this one or a little bit less detailed than some of the others. Going back to the assignment sheet, the second decision that you have to make is to decide on whether you're doing instructions or procedures. Both are acceptable, but you have to decide which one you want to do. In Essentials of Technical Communication, Chapter 10, the authors describe procedures as, quote, general guidelines for performing a task, end quote, and instructions as, quote, specific detailed steps, end quote. With instructions, the order and exact method are very important. Procedures, in contrast, describe information in an order that makes sense for the reader or the writer, but is not fixed and requires fewer specific details. I think of the difference between instructions and procedures as the difference between explaining how to play a board game versus describing how to build Legos. With the board game, you can start at any point and present information in multiple ways while still achieving the same effect. You can start with how to roll the dice, or when to take turns, or what the goal of the game is. As long as you include all that information, the order doesn't matter. With Legos, if you go out of order or don't include key details when the user needs them, then your spaceship turns into a race car, which is bad. Detail and accuracy are necessary for effective procedures, but they are looser and more open to interpretation. For this assignment, again, you can do either, but it's important to match your choice to the specific scenario, audience, and purpose for which you are writing. There will be some scenarios in which case looser procedures will make most sense. There will be others where strict instructions will be very necessary. Finally, you need to choose a medium and a genre. That medium can be print or digital. You can imagine this as something that you're actually printing off and handing to a user, or you can imagine it as a digital document of some sort. But you do need to think about genre. So think about how your audience will access the document. Will it be a PDF handout, a page on a website, a blog post, a poster, a manual? Within those different medium, there's different kinds of genres. So a poster could be an academic poster, or it could be something like a warning poster, or it could be an infographic. Determining the medium and an appropriate established genre that is one that will be familiar to your audience will make writing both documents much easier, as you will have a stable notion of the type of document you are creating. It's really hard to write when you don't have kind of an idea of what it is that you're writing. If somebody says write 2 pages, you have to think, well, is it an essay? Is it a report? Genre helps us kind of imagine what we are writing. Once you determine the scenario, genre, and medium, and then decide whether you're writing instructions or procedures, you should look for examples similar to the type of document you want to write, including but not limited to those I posted on Blackboard. Beyond this class, looking at examples is an important habit for professional writers, because different companies have their own idea of what instructions should look like. And there are significant differences based on how and where these documents are published. I've worked at different companies where what they say a report is different, or what they imagine a press release being is different. In this case, what an instruction or procedure set is could be different at different companies. These differences can all be seen in the example of the recipe. So, while recipes are often accompanied by pictures, I'll pull up an example of one. Usually, they're comprised mostly of numbered lists, a 1 or 2 column ingredient list, short paragraphs, and possibly an info box of some sort, like the information up here. Recipes can be both instructions and procedures depending on what you're baking. Baked goods tend to be more specific and require things to be done in a fixed order, while something like a salad might be looser. It doesn't matter when you add ingredients because they're all going to end up together. Recipes can be print or digital, and most digital recipes have a printable version at the top. For example, clicking on this changes the way that this looks. We'll look at another example of that in a second. Finally, as recent social media trends show, even established genres like recipes change. There's the rise now of short video recipes, which I'll describe in Lecture 5. So this example on all recipes is a good example of a simple recipe for a chocolate cake. It has a brief description. It has general information like the cook time, prep time. It has an image at the top that gives you a rough idea of what you're making. It has a list of ingredients, usually in the order in which they are needed. And then a numbered list with the directions. More complex recipes will have longer paragraphs, while recipes where the order is less important may not have a numbered list. Now compare this recipe with a second, this one from a cooking blog, which is frozen for some reason. Okay. Well, anyways, I'll let this go. In this recipe, you'll immediately notice some differences. Oh, here we go. Between this and the one on all recipes. First, you have long paragraphs. These long paragraphs provide background information that isn't necessary for making the recipe, but it gives more of a sense of style and substance. You'll also notice immediately large, colorful pictures of different points in the process. This one is before you've made the cake. Obviously, this one is after you've made the cake. But the recipe component is very similar on both sites. This one has the list of ingredients, and then you can see here we don't have numbered steps, but they are still broken up into clear sections. An interesting thing to point out is at the very top of this recipe, you can do a print recipe, just as with the previous one, but it cuts out all the extra stuff, all the pictures and everything. That's for somebody who just wants just the recipe. The difference between the two is one of audience and medium. A recipe website is all about providing information to an audience who is likely only there to get the recipe, perhaps even opening it on a phone or a computer while they're cooking. A cooking blog, on the other hand, serves that same purpose while also attracting an audience that might be more interested in the background information, including the author's thoughts on the recipe, pictures from the process, and kind of more of the author's personality. So again, this illustrates how important medium, genre, and audience is. While we're on the topic of recipes, one of my favorite readings that I've assigned for this unit is about making a banana cream pie. It's called A Microcosm of Technical Writing in the Kitchen While Cooking a Banana Cream Pie. This short blog post illustrates one of the biggest challenges when writing instructions or procedures: the level of reader expertise. The author describes his attempt to make a banana cream pie for the first time and his frustrations with the kind of language that is common to many recipes. For example, in response to the directions, "stir constantly until the mixture is bubbly," he writes, "How long do I have to stir this mixture? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? And bubbly means slightly boiling, aerated, or some other state? I stirred and stirred, but apparently not violently enough to get out all the clumps. I swear the mixture never got bubbly, but about 10 minutes into this step, it became thick and creamy, something I wasn't expecting because there's nothing in the instructions that indicated a dramatic change of state." As a novice who had never made this recipe before, key information was left unspecified for the author because the original recipe assumed a certain level of background knowledge. They assumed that somebody would understand what bubbly meant. The author's friend who helped him make the pie understood what vague instructions like "wait until bubbly" and "prick the pie crust" meant because she was already familiar with the terminology and methods of baking. The author ends by suggesting that online instructions are superior to text instructions because they are not limited by space and thus allow you to add the extra details in links pointing to additional pages in drop-down hotspots or through little information pop-ups. Extra information that certain readers will need but others won't. This allows a novice reader to follow those links, to pull in information that they might need, while an expert reader will simply ignore it. Okay, now I want to turn to Chapter 8 of Graves and Graves, which identifies 7 strategies for making instructions and procedures easier to use. While all 7 are important, I want to point your attention specifically to the 4 that are most valuable for text instructions. The first is knowing your audience or user group. Are they experts, novices, beginners? How much previous experience, knowledge, or training do they have on the topic? How do you create a document that can be accessed by different and multiple audiences? How can you imagine a user who is a novice and a user that is an expert both getting what they need from the instructions? Second is to include an overview of the procedures. Provide an intro or overview that helps users to gauge whether the document covers what they need it to. While also providing indication of who the audience is and setting up the structure of the document. Essentially, you need to ask yourself, how can I set the stage for how a user might actually interact with my procedures or my instructions? The third step is to write usable steps. This means organizing information based on steps in the process so that readers can clearly identify the most important details. For instance, in a recipe for a pie, the crust and filling are often in a separate paragraph. Even if the instructions for making the crust is 7 lines long, and the instructions for making the filling is just 1 or 2. Clearly separating those two, while it might throw off the paragraph structure that we're used to in academic writing, makes it easier to navigate because the reader knows, okay, now I'm shifting to another type or set of actions. And then finally, subdivide the processes. Instead of making the whole document a long list of maybe 20 steps, as you'll see in this example, break those down into, so here's the example, just 16 steps. They break it down with subheadings. So you have 5 or 6 or fewer steps. This is called chunking, and it allows you to organize and subordinate the information into meaningful groups. So similarly, in Chapter 10 of Elements of Style, Thibault and Draga suggest placing instructions in chronological order, using numbered lists to indicate that order, limiting each step to a single action, and including reasons for completing that action if they aren't explicit, and warnings when necessary. A few other useful tips from the Graves and Graves chapter include addressing the subject in a second-person singular voice, that is, you do this, you do that. Using the imperative mood, which places an invisible you before verbs that are commands. In other words, invisible you set the oven to 375 degrees. Using bulleted lists when the order doesn't matter, and so it doesn't matter if you follow step 1 before moving to step 2. And then using symbols or icons that are likely to be familiar to your audience or that are self-explanatory. Finally, going back to the assignment sheet, I want to end this lecture with a brief note about what makes a good topic for this project. I have a section on it in the assignment sheet, but I want to go through a few things to keep in mind. So a good topic for your instructions or procedures should first be related to your interests. This is the most important as far as I'm concerned. The more connected you are to the topic, and the more first-hand experience you have with the situation, the more useful and realistic your document will become, because you are invested in it. The scenario you are required to include will help keep your writing tethered to concrete situations, but it's easier to do that if you've experienced that situation yourself. Second, good procedures should be complex and detailed. Considering that the theme for this course is writing in complex environments, topics or instructions should be detailed and intricate rather than simple and easy to explain. We want complex things because complex things require instructions. This makes the task more challenging, but it also gives you experience maintaining the complexity of technical information rather than dumbing it down, while also increasing clarity and coherence. Third, good instructions should be relevant and interesting. Instructions are almost always read in the moment when someone needs the information that they contain. That is to say, no one really wants to read a manual, but they have to in order to complete a task or gain necessary knowledge. Your topic should be relevant in that it's something people need or want to know, and it should be interesting enough that the audience sees the value of reading it for their own needs. Fourth, it should be accessible and legal. Two important things to consider when selecting a topic are A, do you have access to the materials related to the topic? And B, are you allowed to write about it? It is easier to develop instructions about, say, fixing the engine on an airplane if you have regular access to an airplane in order to take pictures, sketch images, and double-check processes. When you don't, then you're requiring someone else's information, and that makes it very hard for you to write as a credible expert on the topic. And B, you need to be able to write about it. I've asked you, if possible, to use a realistic or current situation, like if you're an internship or a co-op or have had a previous job. Even if you have not signed an NDA or non-disclosure agreement about what you're writing about, double check with a current supervisor if you're writing about a current position. That's just courtesy. Let them know what's going on, and they'll let you know if you can or can't do it. And then finally, good instructions should be focused and have an angle. An angle is a particular perspective or focus of communication and is closely tied to purpose and argument. When two people write the same essay about the same topic but go in very different directions, this is a result of the particular angle they have selected. We saw that in the difference between the recipe on allrecipes.com and the recipe on the kitchen blog. The kitchen blog was more about the writer's opinions and perspectives. So its angle was very different than the one that was just about communicating the recipe to the reader. Another example is if you're developing instructions on building a computer from scratch, your angle might be to only focus on the fan system or the cooling system and not on anything else. You're ignoring a whole other set of information, but that allows you to get more detail. So even if it feels limited, you're only describing a part of a larger process. It allows you to make decisions about what background information is necessary and how much detail to go into. Again, there is a section in the assignment sheet that has more information about selecting a topic, and I strongly recommend carefully going through the assignment sheet before you begin to write. That's it for today. Good luck with developing your text instructions.